Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again I am bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, huge guest for me from the band DFL, and also from, and I can't believe I would get to say this, from the band The Atoms. Yes, that's right, long-time Turned Out a Punk fans. We finally have someone from the infamous Atoms. More on that in a second on the show. Monty Messex is here today, and this is a fantastic episode, and I'm very excited for you to hear it. More on that in 1 second. But first, if you'd like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is answered by my brother Tristan Abraham, who is the guest booker, show producer, and all around just amazing support system for me. I love you, Tristan, so much. Thank you for everything you do. And he will get the message to me. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Left4Damien. If you want to support the show, the best way to support the show is just by telling all your friends about it, letting everyone know that you know that we do this podcast here twice a week now, generally twice a week. You can also support it, though, by subscribing to it and rating it on your platform of choice, or by heading over to patreon.com/turnedoutapunk. And thank you, everyone that does do that. I really do appreciate it. And check out some of the stuff that goes up on there, like footnotes and video versions of the podcast. There's a lot of video versions of the podcast going up there as well. And some other fun stuff, hidden episodes, things like that, try and keep it fun over there. And thank you to everyone that does head over there and do that. And speaking of support, this show would not be possible without the kind, loving support of the fine folks of Vans who came aboard a few years ago and said, Damien, do what you do, buddy. Just don't do it out of your own pocket. And they helped me cover the costs. So I can't thank them enough for doing that. And one day I will return to a house of Vans and get to do a live Turned Out a Punk. I truly believe that. I believe it in my heart of hearts. All right. Oh, I play in a band called Fucked Up, and as of now, we are going on tour still, and we're going to be playing with Faith No More, which I'm very excited to get to do. There's going to be a lot of COVID protocols in place. We've got our own COVID protocols in our band that we have to obey as well. But we're going to be hopefully able to play some shows, and I cannot wait to see people there. And so look out for tickets for those events over on the intranet. If you look up Faith No More or Fucked Up in Faith No More, you will find the shows listed over there. Also, very happy to announce that Fucked Up is going to be reissuing Epics in Minutes, which was the singles compilation, and I think there's some like non-singles tracks on there as well, different versions of songs on there as well. Thing that we put out on CD way back when on Get Better Records. We are so stoked to be involved with this label and doing something with this label. And Alex, of course, was on the show way back when. Check out Alex's episode and check out more information at getbetterrecords.com. Also, Fucked Up has, what else do we have? Oh, David Comes to Life. We're going to be going on tour for David Comes to Life, and Matador Records has reissued that record, and you can find out more information about that at matadorrecords.com. And finally, tankcrimerecords.com, or just Tank Crime Records, has put out Year of the Horse on vinyl. It will be hitting stores. It's coming out officially on December the 3rd because this worldwide vinyl shortage and delays. You heard about this? I'm not going to get into it. I'm sure there's a podcast about this. This is not the place to get into it right now, but there are some issues right now with record pressings and all this sort of stuff. So that thing is finally, though, going to be coming out December the 3rd, and you'll be getting your copies if you pre-ordered it before then. So pre-order that thing if you want it. It's an hour and a half long song. Bring a book. No, I think it's the best thing we ever did, apart from the other things I said to buy on this show as well. They're the best things we did too. It's all the best things. All the best things. Speaking of best things, on to today's episode. Today on the show, Monty Messex from the band DFL, from the band The Atoms. Yes, finally, a band that we have talked about on this podcast, and also Footnotes with Chris O'Toole. We've talked a lot about The Atoms over the years, and now finally we get the story of The Atoms from Monty Messex. And that's not to undercut DFL. DFL is a hugely important band to a lot of people, including myself, a band that really kind of kept the fast hardcore flag waving at a time when it was not necessarily the thing that everyone was doing. And they were a band that really brought that to a lot of people, including myself. So he is someone that did it twice with two hugely important bands to me on this show. And also Monty is one of the sweetest people I have ever met. So it is a huge thrill to get to talk to him on here. There maybe a little bit of news about the Atoms at the end of this thing, on the other side of this thing. So yeah, listen to this thing, and then I'll see you on the other side. I'm not going to ramble on because this is a real fun episode. Check out DFL, though. They have a brand new EP because DFL is back, thankfully, on Spam Records. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to pronounce that for a while. The umlaut on the eighth is throwing me off. Spam Records. But DFL have a new record coming out. Why are you DFL? Sorry. And it is fantastic. I love this thing, and I've been listening to it nonstop. It's a new EP. So order that and get it on vinyl. And I think there's one song out so far. I think actually the first track, Why Are You DFL, sorry, is out now on streaming services and such. But you can pick up that record. It's going to be coming out. I think it's out now. I think as of now, you can start ordering it. It's going to be shipping. Yeah, I think so. I believe so. I'm looking on the internet right now as we speak. Anyway, while I look on the internet a little bit more, sit back, relax, and enjoy Monty Messex on Turned Out a Punk. Monty, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm super glad to be here. Yeah, this is insane. It's crazy.
Well, that is, yeah, let me tell you, that is reciprocated on my end too, because we've been obsessed with, well, as a person, I've been obsessed with DFL forever as a band. Like, I love your band, but I think for this, yeah, and it's also something Chris O'Toole, my co-host on Footnotes, also shares. Like, we both love DFL, but it was after we did the Youth Brigade episode and we were researching the label that put out the Extreme single that we realized that you were in this band, the Atoms, and that there's this connection to Decry and to Guns N' Roses, and we have now been obsessed with this band. As you know, I don't know if you've heard, but anyone that comes on that could have seen the Atoms play, I will ask them if they saw the Atoms just so I can get more details about your old band. But before we get there, I got to start this off the way they all start off, which is, Monty, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across the genre?
Oh yeah, that's actually that memory is like literally like burned into my like fucking soul. And it actually has a lot to do with the Atoms too, because I was with two of the guys. One of the guys who ended up playing guitar in the Atoms, Taz Rudd. But it was Halloween 1979. And, you used to have to find all your shows, in the paper. So there was like the LA Weekly, and there was another one called The Reader. And I don't know why we got this wild hair. We were all skaters. So I went with Drew Bernstein and Taz, and we skated together like crazy. And for some reason, we just got a wild hair that we wanted to go see some punk rock, maybe because we had heard something on Rodney on the Rock, maybe because Drew used to listen to that. And Drew could drive. So we drove to the Hong Kong Cafe in downtown Los Angeles. And we saw, it was the Germs were headlining, Fear, and this band called Chinas Comidas, which was like this art band. And then opening was Black Flag with Keith Morris singing.
What a show!
Yeah, it was just like the most transformational, mind-boggling event. And I think I was 79. I think I was 69, maybe 15. And I remember walking up to the show, and the Hong Kong cafes, I don't know if you've ever been to where it is, Abraham, but it's like in this courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
in Chinatown, and it's a really cool looking courtyard, it's like a 2-story venue where at the bottom they had like this traditional Chinese restaurant with like a tank of like lobsters, and it smelled like Chinese food. And then above you walked up these steep stairs and there was this club, this space, I guess it had been a restaurant space they were renting out for punk shows, and you could touch the ceiling. It was really a low ceiling, had like a 6-inch stage. And I walked up to the club and I saw like this girl with like two-tone hair and like these punk rockers. And recently, just in the last, I don't know, a few years, I've been thinking about it, and I've written a couple of things about it for Punk News. And I just thought, these people look as bad as I feel I'm at home. I never looked back. I was just like, I just went all in from there. And the thing I remember the most about the show was Keith Morris, who's about my height or so, rolling around on the ground while he was singing, and he was crammed into a Spider-Man costume that you buy at a drugstore, like the little kid Spider-Man. And I just thought that was just the coolest thing in the freaking world. I mean, it just blew my mind. And the music was just so good. So it was amazing. It was like one of the most amazing experiences, I have to say, musically, definitely of my life, and up there in like the top 10.
What was the vibe like at that show? Because that's like a real interesting period, I guess. Like that's the post-Mask, obviously it's Black Flag's playing first on the bill with Keith, right? So it's pre everything kind of changing. So what was the show like from that perspective?
Yeah, so there were like, and it's actually a perfect example because kind of I think Black Flag kind of led in that post kind of where it became more about SoCal punk and kind of aesthetic, and and where the Germs and even Fear, definitely Chinas Comutas, they were they were artists from the 70s, and that was like the Mask scene. Like a lot of those people were they were artists, and it was a different, like the Screamers, and it's a different vibe. But at that show, I just remember it just being like, I don't know what to say. It was kind of like a weird kind of magical experience because the music was so good, the smells were just like so intense with like this weird smell, but people were still like pogoing. Nobody was like slam dancing. People were like pogoing up and down, and the music was amazing. The Germs are just those songs are just they're great, to this day. And Black Flag, it was great. It was just great.
It's also like, I think I've seen pictures of Keith in that Spider-Man costume too. Like it just feels like it is, you couldn't ask for, kind of like, with even the art band on there too, like a more iconic build to kind of like typify that era, right? Like the fact you've got like the sort of like the three big bands from that scene, like even though one's kind of like, I guess the next wave, but like the Fear, the Germs, like they're all in the decline.
Yeah, they were on top. I don't remember exactly when that Germs record was released, but I remember going out and getting it, and I still have it. And just listening to it like obsessively on my mom's stereo. Obviously I lived with my mother.
Yeah, of course.
And just the songs were just so good, and and it was like the beginning of like the next wave of punk rock in Southern California, where you had guys kind of around 79, 80, like Tony from the Adolescents. I met him, and Wasted Youth and Scranny, and Greg Hetson, and those people were like, that was like 1980.
It's funny you brought up Drew Bernstein, rest in peace, but like earlier, and it's just before I got on the phone with you, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were just kind of like talking about that. There's this kind of really weird little moment or little scene, I guess, pocket where you have Justice League, America's Hardcore, No Effects. I guess the Atoms were also part of it too, but like it really feels like there's also this sort of like younger scene that's also kind of bubbling up too at the same time.
Definitely. I mean, I think Drew was part of it, and the Atoms were definitely, we were like on that new second wave of punk rock that was there. I mean, I remember I grew up in Hollywood, and I was going to Hollywood High, and I think I was like one of the only punk rockers there in like 79-ish. And I met this girl that was, I think, like a couple years ahead of me, Amy, and she had been part of like that mask punk rock scene, where I was part of like this New Jack scene that was like, came, insanely 2 years later or whatever, a couple years later. And I remember in 79, I was hanging out with her, and we were listening to records at her house. She lived, I think, with her grandmother. And she went and got her whole record collection and all of her flyers and magazines, and told me, this is like 79, told me, punk is dead. It's over. Take all this. I'm done. And gave me like everything, which I still have, like literally every single thing she gave me. All these like old like adverts and lurkers and, stuff like that, old English punk rock, and all these amazing flyers, like Screamers flyers and stuff like that.
What was she into at that point? Was she just like, I'm over this stuff, I'm into new romantic stuff, or I'm into hardcore? Or was it just punk is dead, just get it out of my house?
I don't, I think she's like into Roxy music. I remember looking at the cover of Manifesto, and it's like, amazing, like mirror ball, like dance scene kind of, I don't know if you know the cover.
Yeah.
She like yanked it out of my hands. She's like, you wouldn't understand this music.
Oh, that's amazing. You
Which
brought
probably don't, but
well, I don't understand it either, so I feel like I'm in good company at least now. You brought that mass scene, and it's, it is fascinating how that, like, it's such a brief period of time, but it seems like it was a real separate scene. And the thing that kind of springs up in the scene that you're describing, at least in the stuff that I've read, is that there's a lot of police violence. Like that's when the police really start showing up at these shows and busting people's heads, like the St. Patrick's Day massacre, show, for example, and things like that. Did you see that stuff beginning to creep in when you first started going to these shows?
Actually, I was probably too. I don't remember that from the mask, but I definitely remember the police, like in the second wave, in that so-called second wave, like 81-ish or so. So clubs like the Devonshire Downs, the Moose Lodge, and then there are these clubs down in the South Bay, like the Fleetwood and the Raging Waters, Ramping Waters, Falling Waters, something, I can't remember the name of it. But I remember like, getting in the car and driving down from Hollywood to Hermosa or wherever to go see a band in the South Bay, and and the police like pulling you over and pouring out all your beer and saying that they're going to kick your ass and stuff like that, and get out of here, never come back. So, and then there were also just some where was it? I think it was, I want to say Devonshire Downs, but I could be wrong. There were a couple riots back then too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely there was some police violence jumping off. A lot of it in the South Bay, I seem to recall.
Going back before you kind of discovered punk rock, you mentioned being a skater. What kind of music were you listening to?
When I was a skater, so now we're talking like the mid 70s to like the late 70s. So like when I got into skateboarding, it was like loose bearings in your wheels, and literally clay wheels, and you had to like take like a wood screw and like wood screws and screw your trucks into your board and stuff like that. And I was like really obsessed with with skateboarding, and and got into like the Logan Earthski and like these early kind of skateboards that were like a little bit more technical. And at that time, I was really into, I remember Led Zeppelin. So I was kind of like a stoner pothead. I wouldn't say a stoner, but I was definitely a pothead. And I was really into Led Zeppelin, like 8-track tape, really into Aerosmith, especially Aerosmith Rocks, which I just thought was just, insane. And really into like Black Sabbath. So, and actually I remember my first show that I ever went to, not a punk show, but I think before that was somebody took me to go see Aerosmith, I think at the Forum or something like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess there's also that kind of rock stuff's popping off there, like Quiet Riot and Van Halen and bands like that. Were you like kind of aware of that stuff also happening? Like how aware were you of like local music prior to going to this punk show? Like you mentioned listening to Rodney on the Rock.
Yeah, pretty oblivious, to tell you the truth. I was pretty young, so I was pretty oblivious to it. We've listened to Rodney, but again, I don't think I was like, he'd play like Devo and and stuff like that, which I again thought was great. The first Devo record was amazing, but I wasn't too keyed into any of that stuff until later in the 80s when those bands really started to blow up. Even though I do remember skateboarding at the actually where I met Taz, the guitar player in the Atoms, and a bunch of other people, was skateboarding at Marina Del Rey skate park, and I remember like they have like they'd be blasting like Blondie and Van Halen and stuff like that, speakers.
So where'd you kind of go from going to this first show? Like after, like it's what a way to start. Like what were your sort of like other early memories of going of punk rock after that?
Yeah. So after, like I said, I was like all in, I loved the skateboard and stuff like that. And I think I still did a bit, but I was really we dove like headfirst in, and back then there were shows every single night. So you could go from like the Hong Kong to Al's Bar to Club 88 to the Starwood to the Whiskey to clubs down in the South Bay like the Fleetwood to clubs out in the Valley like Godzilla's. So I mean, you could just go in like a circuit of clubs, and people would be flyering. So we just went like literally all 100% in, and and there were bands like I remember. So like I said, I grew up in Hollywood, and there was this building on the corner of Hollywood and Western is where everybody practiced / lived in these like these really disgusting practice rooms, like with like beer and cigarettes and God knows what on the carpets, and and these now looking back, these amazing instruments from were probably from the 60s and the 70s and whatnot. And I remember, we're like little kids, we're like 16, 17 years old, maybe younger. And, I remember there was the Chiefs had a studio, the Gears had a studio, maybe they had one together. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
I remember going and just hanging out with them, or, going down to the South Bay, and we went down to the church and like just hung out down there with whoever was there, to hang out with, dudes from Black Flag, and it was just a time that's all we did was punk rock and alcohol and drugs.
You mentioned like being the only guy in your school into this stuff. Like, what did your peers kind of make of you kind of getting into this sort of, because it had such a bad rap for years, it had such a bad rap, punk rock.
I went to Hollywood High, and there was like an alternative track for the high school. They had I was in that school, I never have felt like I fit in, even before punk rock. I've always felt like an outsider, and like I'm looking in, and punk rock, I think, just kind of gave me like a vehicle or a voice, I guess you'd say, to like express how I felt about that. And the people at my high school they were really straight-laced people, even though it was Hollywood High. And there wasn't really any room for people that deviated from their norms. And so I remember like the girl Amy who gave me her record collection, gave me like a punk rock haircut, which was like a short haircut with like a tail. And that was crazy. And then like I bleached it, and that was like, just way over the top, in 1979. And they'd say things, that were not, not cool, things that I definitely don't want to say. And yeah, it's, and the funny thing is a lot of them in 79, 80 that were, calling me saying, that anyway, I won't go into it, but a couple years later, you see them at the shows,
Yeah.
and after they had found Rodney on the Rock or whatever, or heard about it, became more popular.
Well, I guess that speaks to kind of what we were alluding to earlier. When these people start showing up, is that when stuff starts being less fun, or at least more violent in a negative way?
It definitely, like I said, the violent part that I remember were a lot of people from like South Bay, or maybe it was from Hermosa, from Huntington Beach, which is Orange County, coming up. And it was like this new kind of like jock kind of breed of punkers, that were just, that were, really buff and wanted to fight. Where I was used to like the more arty, drugged out punk rockers. And so, so and also I think the music got more aggressive, the music got more and more aggressive. And the slam dancing got more, it went from pogoing, which is kind of an arty thing to do, to slam dancing, which, people were just going crazy, you know what I mean? So,
yeah. It's funny, Keith, when he was on the show, well, it's not funny, but it was actually kind of, I don't know, very interesting. Keith, when he was on the show, brought up the fact that, because these were a lot of kids, like you're saying, that were coming from these beach communities. These were like outdoor jock kids, just by like the way they were brought up. And because of that nature, like it was just sort of like a jock culture that was just sort of transposed onto punk rock.
Yeah,
for a lot of people.
Some of them, at least, I'm thinking, that they were just like tough guys. You know what I mean? They were tough guys. And I guess in the same way that this kind of gave me an outlet for my angst, it gave them an outlet for theirs too. You know what I mean? It kind of sanctioned that type of behavior, at least in their minds. This was really super aggressive music and aggressive lyrics and aggressive, mosh pits and whatnot. And so, but yeah, they were around. Like I said, I'm like 5'7", and at the time I probably weighed all of 120 pounds. So, I avoided that stuff like the plague.
Mm-hmm. Understandably too, because it just, I don't, I'm not, I'm definitely a little heavier, and I would still avoid that like the plague as well. I think it's almost become storied at this point, the violence in LA punk, like it's almost fetishized on a certain level by people that didn't live through it. But when you actually start breaking it down and hearing, like real accounts of it, it sounds fucking heinous.
Yeah, it was, for me, again, a person that that wasn't like my thing, like fighting, you know what I mean? But for some of these people where it was their thing to be aggressive, that, it was pretty crazy. And you definitely felt like, like anything could happen, in terms of just, getting in a fight, whatever. But like, it never happened to me, I was pretty much on the side of all that stuff. But yeah, I guess maybe, people watch like the Decline, the first Decline, and they see that and they think, it does seem like it's, and I guess, you see like, people, the people moshing and like those kind of iconic, boots, bandanas, and chains kind of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where it started, and so yeah. I guess it's become, and whether they knew it, we knew it or not at the time, it was, in a kind of an American form of music that was, beginning to happen right then, which was like kind of this hardcore Black Flag, Circle Jerks, Adolescents, like jazz or something else. I mean, it was happening then. It was being born.
Well, it's funny once it's interesting you bring up the decline of Western civilization and just sort of like that sort of image of punk rock, like you're talking about. That's the type of punk rock that's exported. Like that's really the birth of punk rock. Like when you look at the stuff that was coming out of CBGBs, a lot of it's super arty, like we were saying, and like look at the stuff that's coming out of England at the time, like I guess sonically, but it's still people were pogoing, like moshing, I guess called thrashing at first, is born in LA. Like this is really like what we know of as punk rock is being born by the scene that you're coming into.
Yeah, for sure. And like a lot of the stuff that came out of England, I guess, 79, 78, Clash, Sex Pistols. Like I love the Sex Pistols, and the Sex Pistols had that kind of raw energy that I liked. But again, when you kind of put that through the filter of like Southern California, it came out more like early Bad Religion and Circle Jerks and Black Flag, which was kind of a different form of punk rock.
Yeah, it's interesting having a bunch of people on the podcast that were really like played in, like Billy Bragg was on, or the people from Coxbar were on, and talking about how skeptical they were of bands like the Clash and the Sex Pistols, just because to them it seemed really arty. And it wasn't until you kind of had bands like the Jam come up that they were like, okay, now we get it. Like it's almost like it just feels a little less authentic than the stuff that would kind of come a little bit later, even though it is obviously, like you're saying, I love the Sex Pistols too, and that aggression is there, and the Clash are the Clash, but at the same time, like they're dressing up a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely dressing up a little bit more. And but I listen to those old Sex Pistols songs, and one of the things I just love about them, not to mention the energy and the look of them, but the sound of those recordings are just so good. The sounds of all the early punk rock recordings are just so great, and I love the sound of Steve Jones, that Les Paul, and it's just so big and just raw. So it's, as a guitar player, between him and like Johnny Thunders, who I loved a lot also, and the Adams, which I haven't really gotten into, but the Adams are really influenced by him. And, and then early 80s LA punk rock, and kind of mix it together. You get like the guitar player I am today, which is not the greatest guitar player, but I like to play punk rock.
Well, you brought up like Steve Jones, and he gets such a like kind of a bum rap, I think, in terms of like what he brought to guitar playing, because he brought like a weird new approach to the instrument, like where it's almost like a rhythmic propulsion device as opposed to being like a lead instrument in any sort of way. Like it's just like, I don't know, these riffs that are just layered over top of each other, so they're just like punishing and pulsing at the same time.
Yeah, it's amazing. The tone that they got on those records is just great. Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say it had a huge influence on me. What were you gonna say?
Earlier when you brought up the gear and the fact that there's all this good gear lying around, like it's amazing how timeless those records sound, because like you listen to Nevermind the Bollocks, it sounds way more contemporary than a record that would have come out in like 87 that was layered with keyboards on it, or just like the early advent of sort of like computer programming on these records just dates it in a way that these records that were recorded with this great gear just still seems timeless. Like, and the Southern California stuff definitely too.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I think really influenced DFL and our recording style, was that we always tried to make it as lo-fi as possible. And a big part of that for me, came out of like these early punk rock recordings, especially like the Danger House, like all that Danger House stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a certain sound that they got, like quality to like the guitars and the drums and everything like that. and like the sound of like Bad Religion's first record, How Could Hell Be Any Worse? You know, like I love the way it just sounds so raw and so much like it's like a performance. They went in the studio, they recorded it, and that was that, you know, and they and didn't overthink it.
Yeah. No, it's all like it, and it's, you brought up Danger House, like that's like a perfect label. Like every release on that label is just like, even the ones that kind of are like more new wavy or a little more, you know, on that kind of end of things are still awesome.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like the Deadbeats, which was like again like an art band, you know, but I mean that came up with a song like "Kill Hippies," you know, it's a ridiculous song, but you know, it's a great, yeah, they were great records and they sounded so good.
So how did the atoms come together?
So that's a good question. Like I said, we were going to lots of punk rock, me, Taz, Drew Bernstein, and I think Taz somehow or another got a guitar, had a guitar. He had this old Hagstrom, and so he could, you know, it's like the old tale of like, well, you're the guitar player because you own the guitar. So he started playing, and he was actually really good at it. And I thought I'll be the singer, and I think we started writing some songs, and then started trying to recruit bass players and, you know, a drummer. And I think I was just reading a fanzine. I've got like a box of like old stuff, and I was reading a fanzine of this fanzine called We Got Power, and it has a review of our first show. And so I think that this guy Oscar Harvey was in the band, or Harvey Oscar, and he was like this guy we were probably 16, 17. He was probably 30, and he was a black dude and played harmonica and hung around, I guess, the punk scene, and he had fought in Vietnam. And then I don't know how I met Jeff Isabel, but he was our first drummer. And I remember he had drums. So he was like jamming with us, and we used to practice out at Taz's mom's house in South Pasadena. She had like this big old craftsman's house, and we had the bit and Taz had like the first, not the first floor, had the I'm blanking on the word. Anyway, he had like a big part of the underside of the house. And yeah, I think we just started writing songs and jamming. And I remember Jeff, he had to store his drums somewhere. Maybe it was before we started. It was in the basement. That was the word that I'm looking for. Tired. And
no, I understand. Don't worry.
Anyway, and Jeff like kept his drums at my mom's house. So in my room that I shared with my younger brother, and his drums were in the boxes that must have been had some kind of like toilet paper that was like heavily scented. And so it ended up, my room smelled like so bad. It like gave me a headache. It was really, that was like one of my memories of Jeff's drums. And yeah, I think we just started jamming and trying to be a band. I mean, it says here in this review, it says the Atoms at Al's Bar, after 2 years of existence and always an amazing number of ex-members, to their credit, the Atoms finally made their debut at Al's Bar on October 23rd. So, and I remember that show because we drove down with Jeff's car through Hollywood, and then he had like this big giant sedan that was, you know, just on its last leg, and it died, and on the freeway with all our gear in it. And Al's Bar is in downtown, so we were probably about a few miles away. So somehow or another, we got to Al's Bar, and then Flea, who was playing in What Is This at the time, I think they were on the bill. Flea jumped in his car. We went and got all the gear out of Jeff's car and drove it back to Al's Bar.
That's amazing.
That's bizarre.
That is awesome. That is wild. So like, how did you like meet Harvey Oscar? Because he's the only person in the band that I can't find out any other information about as far as doing other projects afterwards. Like, was he in other bands? Like, how did you find this guy who's like, and punk rock's one of those weird places where you can have a 30-year-old guy in a band with a bunch of 15-year-olds and it somehow makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I'm racking my brain trying to remember. I think it's the way that I met most people at the time was just at shows. You'd be at a show and you'd be chatting with somebody, and then they'd be chatting, and they'd say, I'm a bass player, and we'd be like, we need a bass player, and you'd be like, I have a bass. And Harvey had like a really beautiful Rickenbacker, this great Rickenbacker bass. And he was actually a pretty decent bass player, if I remember correctly. But he's still around. He's he calls me like once a year just to check in and say hi.
That's awesome. It's so, I don't know. And the only documentation of this band is the 7-inch that came out in 1991. Like, it's so weird.
Like, what? Yeah, that was Chris Trent, our friend Chris Trent, who was also like a punker back in the early 80s with us. And I was at Vinyl Fetish on Melrose, and I saw the Adams featuring Izzy Stradlin. That's what's on the cover of this particular 7-inch. And I was like, what the fuck? And I look it over, and Chris, I guess, released a practice tape on its first song is New York City Blues, which is one of our originals, House of the Rising Sun. Third song is just blank. So he couldn't even figure out what that song was. And then the fourth song is Chatterbox, which is like, I guess, like a Johnny Thunders song that we used to do.
It's so weird because it's also on Test Tube Records, who did the Extremes and the Zeros singles, like the pre-Youth Brigade band.
And yeah. I have that Zero single. That was Chris Trent. He was a genius. He like graduated 2 years early from high school. I think he went to Santa Monica High and graduated a couple years early.
That's amazing. So did you guys actually record anything, or was this just like, this was just a jam session, right? Practice tape, I should say.
The practice tape. We recorded something that I don't, just got lost. I think at Taz's mom had she lived in like this big, huge mansion. Green. It was like a green and green, which is a famous type of mission architecture here in Southern California. And she shared the house with all these people that followed this Maharaja or somebody, some spiritual guy, I don't know. And so one of the people that lived there set up a studio in the garage and recorded us, but I don't know what happened to that. It was like there was like a reel to reel, but so I'm going to ask her. She's still around, and actually we're in touch with her right now because, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know what happened, but I have this recording from Chris, which actually I'm going to take and get it digitized because Chris doesn't know where the cassette is. And I then had another cassette that I've just kept for years. And literally the cassette says Adams 1981. That's what's on the cassette. And I had that digitized, and there were a few other songs on there. And again, it's like a practice. It's horrible. I mean, it's like really like will make your ears hurt kind of music, we were just learning how to play, and, I totally did not know how to sing or do anything, but yeah, we have them. And actually the cassette, I've been in touch with this dude, you probably know him, Brian Turcotte.
Yeah, Brian Ray Turcotte. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I've been in touch with Brian, which kind of led me to actually hearing your podcast, and he's interested in doing a book on Sean Carey, which I've got. Sean drew a lot of flyers for the Adams and drew a lot of stickers for us, and so we were thinking, it'd be cool to have like a section where on like the Adams flyers in that book, and then we could release this other cassette as like a flexi disc or something maybe.
Oh yeah, it'd be amazing. Like I got to hear the Adams. To me is my most desired to hear band at this point, because it's not on the internet, and for historical significance, like the fact that this band does sit in this like really amazing scene, and the fact that also you have members that wind up in Junkyard, wind up in DFL, wind up in Guns N' Roses, like it, and Decry, like it really does. It's a very significant band.
Oh, well, I'll just say this, that I'm shocked to hear that. I I literally have for years just thought like that the Atoms were, just kind of like a little blip that this was not noticed by many people. So it's amazing. Don't get me wrong, totally amazing, but completely surreal to hear, that you're interested in the Atoms, and lately other people have, like Brian's, interest in these flyers and stuff like that. So it's really cool. It's amazing. You just never know.
So how long did you guys go on for? Because there are a couple lineup changes, right?
Yeah, so there was Jeff Isabel, who went on to be Izzy Stradlin, and I think he was the first drummer. Then there was, and he played with Oscar Harvey, and so then I've got a bunch of pictures. I don't have any pictures with Jeff in the band, but I have pictures, I think, with the next lineup, which was Oscar Harvey and Pat Muzingo, who went on to play in Junkyard.
Mm-hmm.
And Pat was like a great drummer. He was like the real deal. And then I think Harvey left, or Oscar left, and then Michael F. Glass, who was in, what was the name of Michael's? I feel horrible, I'm blanking on it.
From the same era?
Yeah, Michael F. Glass, and the singer of his band had a female singer in it.
Sin 34?
That's it, Sin 34. Thank you.
Yep.
So yeah, and then Michael F. Glass played with us, and yeah, and I think what happened, in the end with the band just kind of petering out is, unfortunately, I think just drugs just got in the way, where we, I think, did have some promise, and I've actually been doing some research on kind of putting together a timeline and looking at flyers lately because of Brian's interest, and also like really tragically, Taz, the guitarist and who wrote all the music for the Atoms, was murdered recently. So,
oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, just like a little under a month ago, and I get a message from Mike Mart asking if Taz had been murdered, and Taz sadly had struggled the last few years with homelessness and drug addiction. But so I think that's what happened, was drugs got in the way of just being able to function as a band.
It seems like that was something that really crept in that scene, like in a big way. Like there's obviously there's a lot of people that are very publicly known for not making it out of there because of drugs. But it just feels like at a certain point that became more and more of a presence in the scene.
It was raging. I mean, just at least in the people I was around, it was, no one had a job. No one did anything but go to clubs and live cheaply and do drugs and have sex with each other. I mean, it was just like it was like a 3-ring circus, just 24/7, with that for a good couple of years, there in the early 80s, for at least for me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, like you're saying, you're super young, and it's a lot of freedom for someone who's super young to kind of find themselves with all of a sudden, I imagine.
Definitely. Like zero supervision, zeros. But, I was fortunate, I was able to move on, and actually a lot of people, were able to kind of move on from that. And either some people did go on to have, successful musical careers, and some people, didn't, but, I think a lot of people got sober.
Where did you kind of go after this point? Like, like you obviously you mentioned drugs becoming more and more of a factor. Like, where did you kind of go? Like, in terms of when the band dissolves?
Yeah, when it dissolves, it's pretty foggy to be honest. But I think Taz, I think went on to some other bands. Like there were like a lot of like kind of glam bands that he was like this band Shanghai and I think before he got into Decry. And so there were like a bunch of kind of bands that he got into and kind of left the Atoms. And I think, I really spun out on, just full blown, substance abuse for the next probably 5 years, 6 years of that, and was really fortunate to to be able to get out of it as young as I did. But yeah, it's and so I didn't really do any music again until I started DFL in like the early 90s with like when I hooked up with Tom Davis and the Beastie Boys.
So, like, I guess, like, well, you're, obviously, getting your sobriety and struggling with what you kind of had come through. Were you still able to kind of like be aware of the music around you? Like, were you still able to go to shows? Or were you just focused on getting sober at that point?
Well, in the during the 80s, I did go to I would go out to shows and do stuff, but just eventually it just all just kind of surrounded just full blown substance abuse and using until there really wasn't anything else, and it just got pretty. My life just got really small and really dark.
Yeah. How did you get back into making music again?
Well, in the early 90s, backtracking in the 80s, I bought a Les Paul Jr. So I'd always had a guitar, this really beautiful like 60s Les Paul Jr. that I bought out of like the recycler, some magazine that they had where people would sell things. It was basically like the print version of like Craigslist, I guess.
Yeah.
It was this beautiful guitar. So I'd always was, learning guitar. I mean, and I had a bass back then too. I had this really great, one of these like SG shaped basses. And I remember my Les Paul, Taz, threw it at his girlfriend, I think, and broke it in half. And so I had it glued back together. And because I love Johnny Thunder so much, the guy like painted it to look like a TV yellow double cutaway, even though it's a single cutaway and the cutaways are wrong. But I loved that guitar, and I actually recorded all DFL's, everything on DFL with that guitar. You just had these great P90 pickup and just this wonderful sound. And so after after I kind of got sobered up and I, I've always loved music. Music has always been a big part of me. And started played with some people here around. I was living in Echo Park, played with some Echo Park people, trying to write songs, and it just nothing would kind of gel. And but and then I was friends with Adam Horovitz and just goofing around. I was like, hey, I've been writing these hardcore songs. I think I was getting back into listening to How Could Hell Be Any Worse from the Bad Religion record, and I was writing all these songs that kind of sounded like the music I'd heard at that time in the early 80s. And he was like, yeah, let's go to the studio and play. And so Tom got involved, and Tony Converse and Mike D and other people, and and Mario Codado, and just started recording these like hardcore songs that I had written. And and like I said, just always been a musician and love to play music. So I kind of just found my way back to it, I guess.
It's also like it's such a cool record because it comes out at a time when like that was not like, obviously fast hardcore has come back and has remained back. But at the time it comes out in 93, it's like it's almost out of step in the perfect way that makes it so awesome with the prevailing kind of wave of hardcore at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was kind of like right before like this kind of second wave, like this 90s wave of punk rock. And, to do something lo-fi, do something that was just so in your face and so fast, like, just like we would play back then and people would just look at us just like, what just happened in front of you? Like, was that really like a 30-second song that just happened, And, and yeah, I loved it. It was great. I still love it. It's still just I love playing that music,
I think that's the thing that like, hearing it as a kid, like you're like you're saying, it's so fast. And I think, even the stuff that would come a couple years later in punk rock was so slick. Like it was very polished, very pop punky. And DFL to me has always been like a band that would have fit in more with the stuff that would kind of come into vogue a few years later, even like in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s. Like it's like a real hardcore, it's like a legit hardcore band.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, I remember Brett Gerwitz heard that first single record that came out on Grand Royal, and he, was like, I want you guys to come to Epitaph, but we were going to stick with Grand Royal. And, when we did go to Epitaph, we kind of just stuck with our sound and it seemed like the next wave, like at least like future waves of hardcore became kind of more like a slower kind of, then kind of morphs into like this kind of like Cookie Monster voice, kind of thumping around type hardcore, where it's not like anything like, what I heard, back at the Starwood or something, or Godzilla in the early 80s. So, and it's interesting you should say, because I feel like, DFL's been playing again for the last couple of years, and it feels like that music is getting recognized a little bit again by people. So
Yeah, like it felt like it just kind of, maybe it's in the, I don't know, mid 2000s, something like that. Like it just kind of clicked and people were like, oh, it doesn't have to be one style. Like you can like everything. And it just, I don't know, it feels like now we're at a point where, like you're saying, like there's an appreciation for all the possible mutations of this thing. And I don't know, I feel like DFL, it must have been, like you're saying, like you're showing up, you're playing way faster than anyone else. Like it's hard to think of, like there's no one on Epitaph until Union 13 shows up that's doing anything close to what you guys are doing at that point.
definitely there was really nobody else that was playing like that style of music. And still, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would really, yeah, yeah. And we just decided to just stick to our guns, and just play that style. That was like DFL style of music. So we just, kept at it. And maybe it's there's, these days things are, it's such a crazy mix of music, which I attribute to the internet. That you could have a kid today that's my age when I got into punk rock, like 16, that were born in like I don't know, the early 2000s or something like that. But they could go online and they could hear all this amazing music, from that time period if they want, just by digging around on the internet on their phone or whatever. So there's like this weird kind of mixing of styles and genres, and you go to like festivals, and there's just bands that were around in like the early 80s, or bands that were big in the 90s, or bands that are big, doing well now, and it's just all kind of mixed together, and guys that are my age that are playing punk rock, and guys that are 16 years old that are playing, it's just all, and there seems to be this kind of mutual respect, for all these different kind of mashup of music.
Yeah, and there's a continuum too. Like it feels like there is this sort of, I don't know, like a real linear history to this music where different people can be traced to different things. And I think that's a great thing about this internet for someone like me who's obsessed with kind of connecting these dots, is the fact that like, I can find out about a band like the Atoms that, there's only a bootleg 7-inch of that connects all these different sort of seemingly disparate places for me as like a young person, but yet it all seems cool. And then you get older and you're like, of course it all seemed cool because it was somehow weirdly all connected.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely, definitely. And and we've been playing again, like I said, and Tom and I recorded another record, and it's we wanted to really make it sound like it was, again, in my mind's eye. When I think of DFL, I go back to like the Vex in 1980, or to seeing TSOL for the first time, or seeing Wasted Youth, or first time I saw Circle Jerks, or that first Black Flag show, and just the way it feels back then. And those are like, the way I try to write music, kind of like maybe like somebody that's really into, playing, like a kind of like a really pure form of jazz or something like that, they try to like stick to like that type. And so anyway, we recorded this record that we think at least, really kind of feels like that time still. And it's going to be, should be released actually this summer. It's coming out on this label in Europe called Sabam. So we're really excited about that. Hopefully
That's awesome. Well, I think it's just like you're saying, there's something timeless about it, right? Where like it's something that you keep tapping into.
Totally. I think tapping into is a good way to look at it.
Where were the lyrics? Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Go on. No.
Where were the lyrics coming for on that? Like the songs like The Mosher and Knucklehead and things like that. Like, were you guys going to shows around that time too, kind of checking it out, or are you kind of harkening back to the early stuff when the band's first forming?
I think I was just trying to like harken back. The way that Tom and I wrote a lot of those early songs is that I would like write the music, and then I would write a chorus like Pizza Man, Pizza Man, Pizza Man, he delivers. And then I just like, Tom could just write anything he wants for the verse. And there's some verse I don't know what he's saying to this day. You know what I mean? But my part is Pizza Man. That's the part that I like and that I sing. And I mean, I like Tom's stuff too. The guy's like a poet. And so I just come up with all these titles of songs that in my mind, kind of, again, tapping into that like early 80s punk rock experience of my youth, and some of them were meant to be kind of, just silly, like Meter Maid or whatever. But yeah, it was a time. It was fun.
What were the early shows that you guys played? Like, where was it? Like, I know you guys definitely did those shows opening for the Beastie Boys and stuff, but like, do you guys do like early sort of like smaller shows first?
Oh yeah. I mean, we played, well, when Adam was in the band, we played, but again, we were always still like at the bottom of the bill. But we played at the Palladium, which is a larger venue here in LA. But we were like the opening band with like Fugazi. Mike D calls like Ian and is like, "Can you get DFL on the bill?" All right. And we also played as like the opening band both days, I think, for like Lollapalooza. They have like this side stage, and we were like the band that played first, like as people were like walking in. And then we played. So there were a lot of clubs around. There was like the Gaslight, and we played this crazy, X Large was doing really well then. Fuck, and I have like this flyer of the X Fucked did a show at the Hong Kong Cafe, which was a trip,
Oh, that's awesome.
I kind of circle back there. So yeah, we played
a lot. Who played that show? Sorry,
around.
Who played that show?
The X Fucked show.
Yeah,
that was, I think it was us, Lucifer Wong, and one other band I'd have to dig up.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. But
that's awesome.
Yeah. So there was like a weird scene that was like kind of like jumping off, with music in the early 90s was, there was like some energy there, and definitely, and we also played, the Beasties had their studio in Atwater, G-Sun, where we recorded our first two records. Excuse me. And they had a stage, and I remember they had like this big party there, and they had like a skate ramp, and we played, and all like the kind of the glitterati of that time were there, like the young, beautiful people of the early 90s showed up, and it was fun. It's a good thing, plus a lot of other people. I remember Tony Alva was there, and a bunch of like movie star types.
It seems like those would be hard gigs to play, though. Like for a hardcore band, especially, like it just feels like even opening for Fugazi, where like the band is, I don't know, like it feels like the songs are written to rage to, and certainly not the vibe of Fugazi show.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the story of DFL. That's the story of DFL is playing this type of music where you feel like a bomb just went off in front of you. You know what I mean? Like literally people just look at you like, what the fuck am I watching? Just because the music is so fast and because we like stop so quickly, and then you have like these moshes and stuff like that. But yeah, there weren't really any bands, that were doing that. I mean, the Beasties recorded some songs like that they put on, I think, Check Your Head and Communication, which are great. But there really weren't any other bands that were, even like the early 80s bands that had kept kind of going, like Bad Religion and stuff like that. They had kind of morphed into like a different sound and stuff like, which, in the 90s they did well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like they all found, like a different place to go with what they were doing and stuff like that. But like, it's interesting to hear you say that, because that's what I always imagined it would be like. I would love to see DFL at a show where people are just going nuts. Like that's kind of like how I envision those shows. But I can imagine having been the first on at not Lollapalooza, but a festival like Lollapalooza, you don't really necessarily get kids going off.
No, you don't. You don't. You get people kind of scratching their head, or like at the Fugazi show, I remember us playing in this, which to me looked like this cavern, and it's like everything's like this echoing as people are like sold out show. Everybody's just like walking in. So by the time it's like even close to half full, your set's over.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It's amazing to do that kind of stuff too. But yeah, it's the kind of music that you want to have, like a small club that's just packed with people that are just fucking going out of their minds.
How did the relationship with Epitaph start? Like you mentioned, Brett Gurwitz just heard the singles and you decided that would be the better home to kind of take the LPs.
Well, I knew Brett from early 80s also, and I knew his wife at the time, Maggie, from early 80s also. Her name was Maggie Touch at the time. And so, we were, it was one big, kind of group of friends. And Brett, Maggie reached out to me and said, Brett, is interested in DFL. And at the time I was kind of like, well, things are kind of moving along here at Grand Royal. I think we're going to stick around. But then we wanted to do another record. And I don't think Mike, Adam Horvitz was, the supporter of DFL, but I don't think Mike was that supportive of us. And he was doing other stuff and wasn't interested. And so then I was like, well, let me see if Brett's still interested. And he was. And Brett's always been a huge supporter of DFL. And I have nothing but gratitude to that guy. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. He said, as long as it's okay with Mike. So him and Mike had like some type of like power phone call, and Mike gave the thumbs up, and then we moved over to Epitaph, and it was great. Again, Brett was very supportive, always accepted everything we turned in, was the artwork, the music, it was just thumbs up, And to this day, like I think one of our most popular songs was off of Punkorama 2. which people still really like that song and that compilation.
Oh yeah, it's amazing like how many people come on this podcast and talk about that as being the gateway for them. Like it really, the places those compilations went, like where there was no other punk, like that was the outpost that brought a lot of people in.
Totally. Yeah. So, he was, and I have to say, DFL has always had especially in the 90s. I mean, we just had stupid dumb luck. I mean, I can't tell you. But the thing with the Beasties, it was just, I was friends with Adam. Adam used to come and babysit my older son, Bella, with Ione. And I was just goofing around, like, let's start a band. And he was like, okay. And Brett then, hey, let's, I'd like to sign you guys. And then the Offspring breaks. And, now all of a sudden, Epitaph is like still this cool little label, except for they have $1 gazillion. And Brett was like so generous, like with all the bands on the label when he had all that money, he gave us, a great deal and, supported us on the road. And, it was an amazing time, to be back in punk rock, to tell you the truth. Some people, I guess, will argue, the 90s, but it was a great time. It was a great time, and I love those records that we did with Epitaph.
You went on tour with like incredible range of bands. What's a harder crowd to play for, a Slayer crowd or a Sublime crowd?
Slayer.
That's like the nightmare scenario, I think, opening for them.
It's not even a nightmare scenario. Because we did like they're Indestructible. Is that the name of the record? They're punk kind of
coverage record, right? Yeah.
And so we did that. So they wanted to only play small clubs. Like we played like the Whiskey and like the Bottom of the Hill in San Francisco. I mean, really small clubs where like, 1/8 of their equipment would probably fit into these clubs. And, when you open up for Slayer, in between your songs, there's one thing that people yell at you. And you know what that is, right?
Slayer?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they, you play these shows, and it wasn't hard to play for them because they didn't yell boo, they didn't say anything. They just yelled Slayer, it was just like, that was, so to me, that was hilarious. I thought that was really fun. And the tour with Sublime was great. It was right before they blew up with their last record, unfortunately. And they were the nicest guys in the world, and incredibly talented. And on that, I was able to get to know Bradley a little bit. And we became friends. And it was a total bummer when he lost his life due to drug addiction. I mean, I can't imagine, what it'd be like today to have that guy still around, because he was just incredibly talented.
Yeah, they really did feel, well, like you mentioned, like the next record was the record that, like that still to this day is like, it's a record that is, they're a band that, like would have been, like, who knows, like you're saying, where it would have been, like they could have been, like the next Grateful Dead or something, like they would have been a band that people would follow around. People still follow them around, and they haven't been.
People still do. Yeah. They're still, their music gets played all the time. It's really good. And here's like a hilarious thing. I mean, I think his birthday was recently. And so I went back and looked at the CD, and we're like the first on their thank yous. We get thanked first on that record somehow or another. And then there's like a picture of like the DFL knucklehead face. I don't know if you know it, but slap of somebody, and they're like all flipping off the camera on the inside. So that's cool.
It's I think it's the thing. It's a testament to the fact that like all these people were punk hardcore people, like hardcore people specifically, and loved hardcore music. So here you guys are, kind of one of the few real legit hardcore bands happening. Like, of course, all these people like love the band.
Yeah. It was good. We also had a very good manager at the time. So he was able to. But I mean, we also went on tour with other bands that manager had. We went on tour with Pennywise. We went on tour with 7 Seconds, with Voodoo Blow Skulls. A lot of our label mates. And so it was a time. I'd have to say probably my favorite tour that we did actually was touring with Pennywise. They had a great crowd, and it was a lot of fun. And Fletcher was like, out of his mind, torturing us like day and night, and it was a trip.
Yeah, Fletcher is he's truly, in all my touring experiences, he is when he gets it in for someone, he gets it in for someone.
He had it in for us, but it's the kind of guy that I mean, I don't know, I could be wrong, but it seemed like the more he liked you, the more he tortured you.
Yeah, exactly. If he doesn't like you, he's just going to kill you.
Probably. That's probably exactly right. But with us, he would just shoot us with his BB gun. Like we'd be like playing, and he'd be on the side of the stage shooting us like during our set.
When he was on the show, I asked him who he was scared of, and he said Rollins, because when he saw Rollins sing for Black Flag for the first time, it was at like some house show, and he was high on mushrooms, and Rollins just beat the shit out of him.
Oh, that's saying something, because he's not a small guy.
No, I think the mushrooms helped.
Yeah. I remember we were out playing a show with them in, I think it was somewhere in Texas, maybe Austin, and it was like the middle of the summer, like 8 million degrees out, and we're in our like bad hotel room that's like this motel kind of deal, and all of a sudden like smoke starts coming in the air conditioner that's like one of these that you kind of put on a window, and he's outside the window lighting a towel on fire, trying to like smoke us out of the room. And then our bass player Tom Barta opens up the door. They shove the door open over the guy's feet. He starts screaming, and they're videotaping, and he comes in and he grabs my blanket. He goes, "Get out of bed, midget!" Yanks my blanket off, and he's got this BB gun machine gun that he bought in Japan. But we also had a BB gun machine gun that we had been like hiding for the whole tour, waiting for the right time to get it out. And it was like one of these things, like in a dream. Like I just rolled over, grabbed our BB gun machine gun, and just like started blasting everybody in the room. And they then all piled out of the room. And then Barta from the bathroom like dipped a towel in the toilet, which I think probably had pee in it, threw it towards them at the door, and like wraps around someone's head. I think it was the guy that was probably videotaping. You could hear him go like, "This thing smells like piss." It was like that.
Oh, that's amazing. Monty, this has been incredible. Anytime you want to come back on this podcast, please know the door is always open.
Thank you. Well, us guys with Fuck, our band's name have to stick together. So I've always had a very high regard for your band and for you as well. So this is an honor to be on your show. So I really appreciate it, Adrian.
Thank you, Monty, for coming on the show. And you heard right there, Monty will be back for a part 2 at some point in the near future. And I say at some point in the near future because I am now working with Monty, and we are in the works of getting this Adams record out for the world to finally hear. More information coming on this soon, but Monty and I are figuring it out as we speak. But I wanted to let you know that this has spurred me into action, and there will be a Turned Out a Punk record hitting the world at some point in the near future, because I can't believe we got to the bottom of it. This is like the Rosetta Stone. Through this band, through Monty, you can connect Guns N' Roses to Minor Threat to the Beastie Boys. You can get a lot of stuff. But anyway, we'll get into this later. Monty will be back for a part 2 at some point to discuss that. I'm sure of it. Anyway, coming up on the next episode of the show, so happy I finally get to put this one up for you, because I thought I lost this one. This is one of those episodes that I thought I lost in that hard drive disaster that I've alluded to on the show. But I have found a second copy of this file, and oh my gosh, I am so happy that we get to put this episode up finally. Coming up on the next episode of Turned Out a Punk, the first sitting member of Canadian Parliament ever on the show from the NDP party representing the riding of Timmins James Bay from the band L'Étranger and Grievous Angel, the legend, Charlie Angus will be here on the show. Chuck Angus, as I believe he was credited on L'Étranger. This is a fantastic episode with someone who I really look up to, and I'm so happy I finally get to put this thing up, and I'm happy you get to hear it. All right, that is that for today's episode. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives of Indigenous peoples matter. We need to protect trans kids. We need to help trans people protect themselves. And we need to stop hate and violence towards Asian people and people of different faiths, because this shit is not political. This is just basic human rights stuff. So smash fascism and let people be free. That's all we need. And sign your organ donor cards, because when they come looking for those organs, you don't need that shit. You're just like, I don't need this. Get it out of my body. Maybe you can do some good with it. And they can. They can. Science can. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. So sign those organ donor cards. Go out there and make your own culture, because anyone can do this. And it doesn't have to be a podcast. You can be starting a band. It could be starting a fanzine. It could be starting anything. You're just drawing a picture. Just draw a picture. You don't have to show anyone. Just do it for yourself. Try something. Try making something creative. And since you're trying new things, try meditating. Maybe it'll work. I try it, and it works for me. And I didn't believe in it. I really didn't believe in it. And now I kind of do. So maybe you will too. Try it. And that's that. Get your shot. Wear a mask. And I'll hopefully see you at a show. Holy. That would be fun to play a show again. And but I think that is it for today's episode. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one. Bye.